I'm very happy to have Frank Russo with us today. Frank's a brilliant drummer based in Maryland. He's performed with so many great people. If you read his bio, some would include Dr. Lonnie Smith and also the great trombonist Hal Crook. Frank's got the opportunity to perform all over the world and tour internationally, perform at some of the very prestigious jazz festivals there are. And Frank's also a educator of music. He's a college professor. So, Frank, good to see you. Thanks for being with me or being here with me today.
Yeah, great, Abe. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Frank, the first thing I wanted to ask you was maybe a little bit of a, we can reflect a little bit. You've had the opportunity to work with so many great people. You're in this position of being a college professor of music with so many young musicians dream to be in that position and have that, that sort of job. What, right now today, in November of 2024, what are you most grateful for, you think, in your
Mhm.
career?
Mhm. Well, that's a great question. I think that there's unfortunately a lot of musicians that get burnt out and they're not as grateful, or you should be maybe more grateful for the work they've had. It's always easier to look at what you haven't accomplished than what you have accomplished sometimes. And I think that my dad was a musician, and my brother and my brother-in-law, big influences. Just your family members, and they were all great musicians. But growing up in New York City, or near New York City, I grew up in Brooklyn, and growing up near New York City, there was just so much music happening back then, and I just, uh, you just had access to seeing so many of the greats, so many of the legends, and experiencing live music like that. Because it's one thing to stream or listen to music, but once you see it live, once I saw it live, that was it. I really I fell in love, and I'd say that I started on piano, and then I went to drums. And I really, even though I kind of pushed music away for a while because it was not everybody else in my family did it, right? So like I went to sports first, and and then after after a while I warmed up to the idea, and then I started listening and reading about the Charlie Parker book, Bird Lives by Ross Russell, and listening and checking out the music. But once I saw it live, and I was just telling someone today at Old Dominion University here, I went to a clinic, and once I saw it live, jazz. My first concert was at the Village Vanguard. Really, my first remembrance of jazz, and it was at the Village Vanguard. It was Joe Frau right after Moon Germs came out, and it was Eddie Gomez on bass and Steve Gadd on drums, and I can't remember who else. And that was just, it was just, I don't know, to me the biggest revelation, because I'd seen many concerts before, but just the communication and the emotion and the interaction. And
So you knew at the Vanguard at the time that the level of improvisation that was happening, even though it was your first, quote unquote jazz concert, you could tell that there was something else.
absolutely, I knew that right away. This was better is the wrong word to use, but this was more of the music that I started loving right away. And I had been listening to a lot of Charlie Parker and a lot of Miles Davis before then, and even the Moon Germs records. And then on my way out, I saw who was playing the following week, and all I saw was the words Max Roach. He wasn't the leader, but I just saw Max Roach's name, and I knew that from Charlie Parker. And I went, "Oh, I'm coming back next week." And the leader was pianist Teddy Wilson, who I knew nothing about, and it was Max Roach on drums, and that's why I went. And that's where it started. And so I'm just I'm grateful that I at a young age, I don't know, I was 16, 17 years old. I don't think they checked IDs as strictly back then. Uh, you
No,
know,
that's such a blessing. I mean, that's to be able to be in that room with
yeah,
Steve Gadd and Max Roach. It's it's like you said, you used the word revelation.
yeah.
Um, you know, did you start to feel that your playing went into you started to have more revelations about that you had a better understanding of how to play the music, or is that something that came on, with time?
I think it came on with time, but I think one I think one thing that happened immediately is when I started listening to the records, then I could picture what was going on. Rather, it wasn't as abstract
On
as
the drum set, you mean?
yeah. No, when I would put a record on, like when I would listen to Max Roach, I could actually then listening, I could see him playing after I saw him play live. You know what I mean? And that happened with so many people. So I really think that was um, a big thing for me personally. And the guys, the guys that you look up to, of course, you talk about being grateful. I'm really grateful, for so many things. Um, First of all, to be able to play creative music and have a life, a journey, in music. And I think that, all of my teachers, including the people I've played with, you know, that's some of your teachers very, very well, and my peers, and my students that I learn from as I teach. The opportunity to teach, I'm grateful for, and I wouldn't. I can't go past that without just talking about it, my wife and daughter as well, and my son, and just having a family, feeling um, you know, thankful generally in life, and I have to say their support and that having anybody, all of us that are creative artists, we need a support group, supporting cast,
Unquestionable.
and
I
and
couldn't
and
agree more.
and that community. That's the word I was looking for. Community. We need that supporting community, and that's what I think I'm really grateful for, and but yeah, just the community of jazz that was happening back then. I'm talking mid 70s. Is when this was going on. The Vanguard, the gate was still open. The Sweet Basil's was down the street, which later on became Sweet Rhythm or
This
something.
was also the disco era too, right? A little bit.
Yeah, yeah, it was the Bee Gees. They had that going on, and it was just a vibrant community to grow up in. Not that it's not still there. I think there's still going on there, but it was special because the older guys were alive, so I got to see, as far as drummers and heroes, I got to see Jack DeJohnette's band, who had Lester Bowie and John Abercrombie and Eddie Gomez. I got to see Elvin Jones's band so many times. Rio Kawasaki on guitar, and Frank Foster, and just all these monsters that was still alive then. This is all before I graduated from high school. I saw Tom Harrell and Bob Berg and Al Foster, and uh, just all these people that really, I think, made a big impression on me as far as musically. And again, not that other music isn't great, but in this particular genre, just the creativity, the interaction, the emotions, just the emotion that creative music creates, and that was a really just a really big part of it. Yeah.
No, that's great to hear. And you talked about that, you use the word monsters and you're totally right when you mention the name Elvin Jones. There's only one Elvin Jones, and there won't ever be another Elvin Jones. Do you think that maybe the reason that maybe it's possible that the one of the reasons the music was just so heavy back then and there was a different energy and flow was because we just weren't as distracted as we are now with the social media and technology? Because I've always thought about that. Maybe that's why it was just on another realm, so to speak.
Yeah, I think this is a great, interesting point, Abe. I think that I, I think now there's so much of it. There's too much available. I know the great Ralph Peterson when he was teaching at Berkeley School of Music. He would say, all my students have every Miles Davis recording on their phone, and they don't know one of them. And I think sometimes when you had less, you just took a deeper dive into it, and so yeah, I think now there's just so many choices, and realistically, you can choose whether it's distraction or not, right? And it's like, man, get in the practice room, put your phone away. It's like, if you're going to miss a gig, if someone's going to call you for a gig, you're going to miss it because you practiced for an hour.
Yeah.
Maybe they really didn't want you on that gig,
Yeah.
that badly. But I think that I think definitely, I think some of the technology is great, and some of the technology is just distractions, and songs are now, I like this is one I use a lot with my students. I mean, songs now are compressed to 2-3 minutes. Everything is like in these little small bites, so you can get to the next one instead of enjoying them. But it was like the organ solo in the Doors' "Light My Fire," right? The organ solo is longer than most, hits today. Just the
That's
organ solo,
yeah.
you know what I mean? And that's true when you think about, all the even just the regular pop music back then was so much longer.
I was getting some advice from somebody about posting clips on social media, and I posted a clip that was maybe about a minute long or something, and this person is like an expert in marketing, and he said too long.
Yeah, I
15,
know.
15 seconds. That's it, no more. And I was like, okay, well, there's something to be said for that, the technology has really changed a lot. And you mentioned that you got a chance to see some of these, people play, and it's such a privilege. You're also still, starting to develop your own voice on jazz, and you're probably looking at like, if I could only play with this person now, if you could go back and assemble your dream band,
Mm-hmm.
anyone you want, who do you think you would like to play with?
Yeah, well, that's also a very interesting question. You know, I have been a band leader, but I'm not, a regular band leader, right? I've done a couple of records, and I'm more in my career. I've been more of a sideman, certainly, than a band leader, and so I often think about, okay, it's not so much like who would I assemble as a band, but what band would have loved to been in, right? And so of course, to be in John Coltrane's band and experience what Elvin went through, man, just to see that creativity. I mean, that obviously was incredible. The Miles second quintet, what an incredible time, and guys that were exploring. That's another word I forgot to mention. It's just people that were stretching and exploring, and really was trying to think outside the box. Uh, More, and going still in that vein, and then I'll get to contemporaries. The Thad Jones big band. I was able to see the Mel Lewis Thad Jones band on a Monday night down at the Vanguard. What a legacy that was. And if you haven't checked out the book, there's a great book by Mel Lewis called "View from the Back of the Bandstand." And he wrote it mostly, and a lot of other people. There's a lot of interviews in it with Dick Oates and all kinds of people, Kenny Washington, so many great people. It's really an interesting book. But yeah, that band was powerful, and just, it's a whole different thing. But then I think contemporary, when I think of contemporary bands, just immediately, without thinking much, immediately what comes to mind, of course, playing with Pat Metheny, playing with John Scofield, playing with Brad Meldau, playing with Keith Jarrett, all of those guys. I think I bought almost every one of those guys' records because and that's a lot of information taken. And that's the other thing is it's used to buy a record and study it. You know what I mean? Instead of just buying the next one. But, to know the difference, like even in, let's say, Scofield's band, to know the difference between, his most current group with Steve Swallow on bass, Bill Stewart, the trio, compared to the band that the quartet that was so famous with Bill Stewart, Dennis Irwin, and Joe Lovano. And going back before that, Mark Johnson was on bass. And then before that, he had a record with Charlie Hayden and Jack DeJohnette. Before that,
Yeah, I could see you like fitting in. Did you know the record he did with Billy Higgins with,
Oh, sure, of course.
I could see you like really like in that record, like, doing the service it needs for the music. That one in particular came to mind when you mentioned Scofield.
Yeah. There's he's had an arc, and when the band changes, he keeps his sound, but it still expands somehow. And same thing with all those guys. I mean, I saw Keith Jarrett's last trio gig at NJ Pack, and man, what that trio, just the longevity and the creativity of that trio was just something special. And yeah, so yeah, those are all they're all some of my top inspirations and guys that have I think.
That's great to hear that all those names. And I also wanted to ask you, Frank, when you've had the opportunity to play some really great festivals and venues, that sort of thing, and how does it feel for you before you step on stage? What do you tell yourself? I mean, do you have a certain, mantra, or you take a couple deep breaths? Do you need to practice a certain amount? Like, kind of walk me through what happens before you hit the bandstand.
Basically, don't screw up. No. No, that's interesting. I do. I tell you what it is recently. I generally do a lot of preparation, right? So I'm a studier. I'm good at research. I guess there's a part of me that likes all that stuff, and so I generally check out someone's music a lot before I'm going to play with them,
Mhm.
and and what I've noticed is I have to let a lot of um, that information go and just remind myself to be in the moment and listen. I think that's recently that's become more and more important to me. Listen, closer. Not that you always want to imitate things, or you just want to be sensitive, more and more sensitive to what's going on around you. And I think, man, I wish I could remember. I was just reading something that someone said, Abe, and they said that when when you first start playing, you're just listening to yourself, basically, and as you develop, is that you listen less to yourself and more to the people around you. And I've heard so many great clinics, and we've heard it all. It's different from hearing it and actually doing it. And when you start sensing that you're listening more, and someone said, don't, I forget what clinician it was. They said, don't listen to yourself, listen through the music. Listen, try to hear the music that's going on and how you're blending. And that's another word that I think has become more important to me is someone talked about not playing with somebody else, but trying to blend your sound with that person. And for some reason, I mean, different things mean different things, to different people. But this made a lot of sense with me, right? So if I'm playing with a bass player, it's not I want to play the same time with him or we're going to groove together. I'm trying to blend my sound with that person. That takes on a whole different thing because when you talk about blending, then you're really listening and you're trying to play at the same volume, so that you can blend your sound together, and so that has taken on a new meaning for me, and I think that's something. So going back to your original question, and I think that's the stuff that I'm trying to remind myself most before playing. Be in the moment, uh, uh, listen, and try to blend. And I don't know if you know the movie My Cousin Vinny.
Of course.
Yeah, like you blend.
Yeah.
That's
Oh yeah, you
that's
blend. Yeah, that's one of my favorite movies. No, I definitely understand what you're saying, and what you're talking, it is easier said than done, but this is, at least for me, I'm finally like the last couple, the last, I don't know, I've been a perfectionist, and I used to treat everything like life and death, and I'm trying to just step away from that now. But when you're talking about the volume and the overall, just playing through the music, when you when it becomes that way for you, does it almost feel maybe a little bit transcendental, or kind of like you're having a
yeah,
spiritual thing going on? Because a lot of people connect this music to a higher,
absolutely, absolutely, Abe. And I think I would going back to you said what you're most grateful for. I think spirituality and having faith. I don't know how I would make it through life without that because there's a lot of ups and downs in music. There's highs and highs, and there's lows of lows. And that it's part of that community support is just. But yeah, I tell you, there's a couple of key people that there's a lot of musicians that you play with that will, you don't really, maybe you work with a lot, but there's a couple of key people that really took the time to straighten my ass out. And you'll never forget those people because they entrusted you for some reason with what you needed to hear. And a lot of people, don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't know, or imagine, and maybe I was too young and brash for people to really feel I would take the information in. But with this, I was recording, and actually I'm playing with this person tomorrow night. John Toomey, great pianist at ODU, and we're playing with the great vibraphonist Steve Nelson.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Steve. Steve's brilliant.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so I'm so fortunate to play with these guys. And back in 2003, I was playing with John a lot back then. And he, I don't know if we were doing a take, but we did a record together, and it's called Quiet Now. And it was a reflection of me. The record was more about, of course, we played that tune Quiet Now that, of course, Bill Evans made famous, but not that he composed it, but he made famous. But it was just a capturing a moment of playing trio and learning not to bash drums. You know what I mean? To really, I used to think when I was young, everybody wanted Elvin Jones on their drums on their gig, and I try to play like that, or whatever, more of and I had more of a fusion background anyway. But I was learning how to play brushes better and really how. So this is going back to 2003, and we were we were doing something, and all of a sudden I didn't hear any piano, and then I hear a little piano, and then all of a sudden, and so we stopped. I don't know if maybe it was maybe it was a sound check or something. And I said, I'm not sure if it was my headphones cutting out or or John, were you adjusting your mix? Yeah, he's in the next room over. And he said, no, I was seeing if you were listening and you were going to respond to me if we
Ah.
if we were going to interact.
Well, you talked about the brushes too, which is, something I think is important.
That was such a big memory. It was like, oh, I'm supposed to listen,
Ah,
and that was really a moment that I'll always remember. Sorry.
no, no, no. You talked about the brushes, and this is a question I wanted to ask you because you know you have such a wealth of knowledge about just overall the drums in general. Uh, what are your thoughts? Let's say if someone asked you to play a gig with them and they said brushes only, how would you feel like as a drummer, as a jazz drummer?
I love it. Yeah,
That's great.
I mean, you know, there's a time and a place for everything, but I think with first of all, with brushes, not that you can't play legato with sticks, but the whole art of playing brushes is legato, and some of the obviously monsters brush players that I look up to, Jeff Hamilton and Peter Erskine and Bill Stewart, even Kenny Washington, going back for Nell Fournier, Shelly Manne. There's a history of really really great brush players, and I think I, I think the thing about playing brushes is that you're to me it makes me play differently or approach the because I try not to use as much of the language that I would play on sticks, right? I would try to play more sweeps and more of why I'm using the brushes. But yeah, it's definitely a volume thing. And although, you can hear guys just really create shapes, even with brushes, shapes and dynamics and everything else. So I think that you can certainly still create a lot of pictures and paint a lot of pictures, and you can still uh, really still explore the great um, dynamics. And I think that's the other thing. I think the older I get, the less I want to play loud. I think when there's a guitar or a piano trio, like the Jim Hall live record, you know, I mean, that's just classic guitar trio.
Well, the reason I wanted to ask you about excuse me, brushes was because we just lost Roy Haynes this week. God rest his soul. And Roy, on Blues of the Abstract Truth record, played brushes on Stolen Moments in a way that, really affected me, tremendously. I mean, I'm kind of like talking about but talk about Roy Haynes before we wrap up. What does Roy Haynes mean to you?
Yeah, that's a yeah. I was reflecting a little bit on I like probably most of the jazz world reflecting on Roy Haynes recently, and there's a couple of great solos that I've taught my students throughout the years that I very very close to, and I've seen him play live many 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 times and talked to him personally on occasions, and the one record that I think that when I play it, it just I don't know, it always hits me at an emotional level, a joyful level, and everything between. And that's that Now He Sings, Now He Sobs by Chick Corea. And talking about brush playing, there's no greater love is on that record. And Roy plays the hell out of brushes
Yeah.
on that record. But every tune on that record he plays the hell out of.
No,
Uh,
this is great. Frank, I want to thank you so much for being with me,
yeah,
being here today with me. It's you're an inspiration to drummers and jazz musicians,
oh,
and
thanks,
you
Dave.
know
You as well, man.
I appreciate we'll definitely work together, and I would love to have you back on here, and you
Thank you.
know we'll talk more about the music and life and all that stuff. But thank you.
Yeah, boy, that went by really quick.
It goes by fast.
My favorite subject, jazz. Thanks, Dave.